The gunshot echoed through the canyon as Penelope Vaughn's hands trembled against the hot barrel of her father's revolver. The smoke hadn't even cleared before she gathered her meager belongings, mounted her mare, and fled the small mining town of Silverdale, Colorado. It was 1875, and she had just killed a man, not any man, but Jedediah Blackstone, the notorious outlaw who had murdered her parents in cold blood and tormented her for months afterward. As she rode into the darkness, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face, Penelope knew there was no going back, only forward into the unknown wilderness of the American frontier. The spring air was crisp as Penelope pushed her exhausted horse through the rugged terrain. 3 days had passed since her desperate flight from Silverdale, and both she and her mount were near collapse. Her chestnut hair, once neatly pinned beneath her bonnet, now whipped wildly around her face as she scanned the horizon for any sign of shelter. The distant wisp of smoke rising above the pines gave her a flicker of hope. "Just a little further, Belle," she whispered to her mare, patting the animal's sweat-slicked neck. "We'll find rest soon." As she approached the source of the smoke, Penelope saw a modest cabin nestled against the foothills. A man stood outside, his broad shoulders bent as he chopped firewood with practiced swings. She hesitated, weighing her options. Towns meant questions, but isolation meant vulnerability. This solitary cabin might offer temporary refuge without the scrutiny of too many curious eyes. The man turned as she approached, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. His eyes, the color of weathered sage, narrowed beneath the brim of his cowboy hat. "State your business, madam," he called, his voice deep and wary. Penelope swallowed hard, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the suspicious circumstances of her arrival. "I seek shelter, sir. Just for the night. I can pay." The lie slipped easily from her lips. The few coins sewn into her petticoat would barely buy a meal. The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her trembling hands and the dark circles beneath her eyes. "You're running from something," he stated rather than asked. "Aren't we all?" She countered, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. "Name's Mason Thornton. This is my land you're on." "Penelope Vaughn," she replied, deciding that honesty about her name, at least, might establish some tenuous trust. Mason nodded toward the cabin. "There's stew on the fire. Your horse looks dead on its feet. Stables around back." Relief flooded through her, but pride kept her spine straight. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Thornton. Good thing I didn't offer any. You'll earn your keep." He returned to his chopping, the conversation clearly over. Penelope dismounted on shaky legs and led Belle toward the small stable. As she removed the saddle and brushed down her faithful companion, she wondered what kind of man Mason Thornton was. His hands were calloused from work, not the soft palms of a gambler or the trigger-happy fingers of a gunslinger. Yet something in his eyes spoke of experiences that had hardened him, just as her own recent tragedies had begun to harden her. Inside the cabin, warmth from the hearth fire washed over her, and the aroma of venison stew made her stomach clench painfully. The interior was Spartan but clean: a table, 2 chairs, a bed in one corner, and a chest likely containing his possessions. A rifle hung over the fireplace, and a bookshelf held more volumes than she would have expected from a frontier cabin. "Sit," Mason instructed as he entered behind her, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and placed it before her with a chunk of cornbread. "Eat slowly. You look half-starved." Penelope wanted to devour the meal in seconds but heeded his advice, taking small bites as she felt his gaze studying her. "You have questions," she said between mouthfuls. "Many," he confirmed, serving himself and sitting across from her. "But they can wait until morning. You need rest more than I need answers." "And where will you sleep, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, eyeing the single bed. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count. One more won't hurt me." He gestured toward a trunk at the foot of the bed. "There's a nightgown in there. Belonged to my sister before she moved east with her husband. It should fit you well enough." Penelope finished her meal in silence, wondering at the kindness of this stranger. In her experience, men wanted something in return for their generosity. Yet Mason Thornton seemed to expect nothing beyond perhaps the truth when morning came. Later, as she lay in his bed, clean from a basin wash and dressed in the borrowed nightgown, Penelope stared at the rough-hewn ceiling beams. Outside, she could hear Mason moving about, settling by the fire he'd built. Sleep should have claimed her immediately after days of exhaustion, but her mind raced with memories of Jedediah Blackstone's surprised expression as the bullet found his heart, and the fear that his associates would hunt her to the ends of the earth. Dawn broke with soft golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Penelope awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous days came rushing back. She dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes, smoothing her hair as best she could before stepping outside. Mason was already up, tending to the horses. Belle looked better after a night of rest and feed, her coat gleaming in the morning sun. "There's coffee on the stove," Mason called without turning around, "and biscuits warming in the oven." Penelope retrieved the coffee and a biscuit before joining him at the corral. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Thornton. I'll be on my way after breakfast." Now he did turn, his expression unreadable. "And where exactly are you headed, Miss Vaughn?" "I haven't decided," she admitted. "Somewhere no one knows me. Running doesn't solve problems, it just gives them time to grow bigger." Anger flashed through her. "You know nothing of my problems." "I know the look of someone who's killed," he said quietly. "I wore that same look for years after the war." Penelope's hand trembled, nearly spilling her coffee. "I should go." "You could stay," Mason offered unexpectedly. "I need help around the place. Winter was hard and I'm behind on repairs before I can take the cattle to higher pastures for summer grazing. I'm not a ranch hand, but you're strong and desperate, which sometimes works harder than skill." He leaned against the fence post. 2 weeks. Food, shelter, and a small wage in exchange for honest work. By then, whoever's after you might have given up the chase. Penelope considered his offer. 2 weeks of safety seemed like an eternity after days of constant fear. Why would you help a stranger who might bring trouble to your door? Mason's gaze drifted to the distant mountains. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most." And so Penelope Vaughn found herself agreeing to stay at the isolated cabin of Mason Thornton, a man she knew nothing about beyond his apparent willingness to harbor a fugitive. The irony that she might be trading one danger for another wasn't lost on her, but desperation offered few choices. The days fell into a rhythm of hard work that left little time for dwelling on the past. Mason taught her to mend fences, tend the small vegetable garden, and care for the modest herd of cattle that provided his livelihood. He never pressed her for the story she clearly carried, though she caught him watching her sometimes with questions in his eyes. A week into her stay, as they sat on the porch after supper, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained, Penelope found herself speaking of things she'd planned to keep buried. "He killed my parents," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the setting sun that painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Jedediah Blackstone. They refused to sell our land to the mining company he represented, so he made an example of them." Mason remained silent, giving her space to continue or retreat as she chose. "I was in town when it happened, selling eggs and butter when I returned." She swallowed hard against the memory. "They were lying in the doorway of our home. My mother still had flour on her hands from baking. My father's pipe was smoldering beside him." "I'm sorry," Mason offered simply. Blackstone didn't know they had a daughter. He thought he'd eliminated all obstacles to the land. "When I filed a complaint with the sheriff, he laughed in my face, said accidents happen. The next day, Blackstone came to me, offering to buy the land for a generous price, given the unfortunate circumstances." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I refused. That's when the threats began. Small things at first: dead animals on my porch, windows broken in the night. Then one evening, I returned to find him waiting in my parents' home, sitting in my father's chair as if he belonged there. He said no one would believe me if I accused him, that a woman alone had few rights and fewer friends. He said he could take whatever he wanted. Mason's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her story unfold. I took my father's revolver from the drawer beside me and shot him through the heart, Penelope finished, her voice eerily calm. Then I ran, and now I'm here with blood on my hands and nowhere to call home. The silence stretched between them as twilight deepened into dusk. Finally, Mason spoke. You did what was necessary to survive. There's no shame in that, isn't there? Penelope turned to him, moonlight silvering the unshed tears in her eyes. I took a life, Mr. Thornton. Whatever kind of monster he was, I became something I never thought I could be. The difference between you and him is that you didn't choose violence until it was the only path left, Mason said firmly. That matters. Does it? To whom? God, the law. She shook her head. I don't expect absolution, Mr. Thornton. I just want to find somewhere I can exist without looking over my shoulder every moment. Mason stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. Come with me. I want to show you something. Curious despite her emotional exhaustion, Penelope followed him down a narrow path that led behind the cabin and up a gentle slope. At the top of the rise stood a single grave marker, weathered but well-tended, with fresh wildflowers placed at its base. My wife, Rebecca, Mason explained quietly. Died of fever 3 years ago. We came west together after the war, dreaming of building something that was ours alone. She never got to see this place become what we'd imagined. Penelope felt a pang of unexpected jealousy at the tenderness in his voice. She was fortunate to be so loved. I couldn't save her, Mason continued as if he hadn't heard her. Rode for 2 days to fetch the doctor, but by the time we returned, she was gone. For months afterward, I believed I didn't deserve to live when she couldn't, that surviving was somehow a betrayal. He turned to face Penelope, his expression solemn in the moonlight. It took me a long time to understand that living isn't just about deserving. Sometimes it's about honoring those who can't be here by making something worthwhile of the days we're given. Is that what you're doing here? Making something worthwhile, Mason shrugged. Trying to. Some days are better than others. They stood in companionable silence by the grave, the night sounds of the wilderness enveloping them. For the first time since fleeing Silverdale, Penelope felt something like peace settling into her bones. The next morning brought change as unwelcome as it was unexpected. Penelope was gathering eggs from the small henhouse when she heard approaching horses. 3 riders appeared on the road leading to the cabin, dust billowing behind them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she ducked behind the structure, peering cautiously around the corner. Mason emerged from the cabin, rifle held casually but ready at his side. The lead rider, a portly man with an elaborate mustache and star-shaped badge pinned to his vest, reined in his horse. Morning, Marshal, Mason called, his stance relaxed but watchful. What brings you out this way, Thornton? The marshal acknowledged with a nod. Looking for a fugitive. Woman by the name of Penelope Vaughn. Killed a man back in Silverdale about 10 days ago. Thought you might have seen someone passing through. Penelope's blood turned to ice. How had they tracked her this far? And why was a marshal involved in what should have been a local matter? Haven't seen any strangers, Mason replied evenly. Been too busy with spring work to notice much beyond my own fences. The marshal's companions, hard-faced men who didn't wear badges, exchanged glances. One of them spoke up, his voice carrying a hint of menace. Blackstone was a business associate of ours. We're mighty interested in finding the woman who shot him. Business associates. Penelope suddenly understood. These weren't lawmen pursuing justice. They were Blackstone's mining company enforcers using the marshal as cover for their vendetta. Can't help you, Mason said firmly, but you're welcome to water your horses before you move on. The marshal studied Mason's face for any sign of deception. Mind if we look around? Woman might have passed through without your knowing. My land, my rules, Mason replied, his grip tightening imperceptibly on his rifle. And I don't recall inviting you to search my property." Tension crackled between the men. Penelope knew she should reveal herself, spare Mason the danger of harboring her. Yet fear kept her rooted to the spot, breath shallow as she awaited the outcome. After a long moment, the marshal spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "We'll be moving on then, but keep an eye out, Thornton. There's a reward for information leading to her capture." "I'll bear that in mind," Mason said dryly. The riders turned their horses, but the second enforcer lingered, his cold eyes scanning the property. "Pretty flowers by that grave up yonder," he commented. "Shame to think something might happen to such a peaceful spot." Mason's expression hardened. "That sounds mighty close to a threat, mister. Just an observation," the man replied with a cruel smile. "Things burn easy out here in the dry season." The trio rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and unspoken menace in their wake. Penelope waited until they were specks on the horizon before emerging from her hiding place, legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Mason hurried to her side, steadying her with a strong hand. "You heard?" she nodded, unable to form words past the terror clogging her throat. "They'll be back," he said grimly. "That wasn't just the law looking for a murderer. Those other two had personal interest written all over them." "I should leave," Penelope managed finally. "They'll hurt you if they find me here. And they'll kill you if they catch you alone," Mason countered. "We need to think this through carefully." She echoed, searching his face. "This isn't your fight, Mr. Thornton." His eyes met hers, determination evident in their depths. "It became my fight when I offered you shelter. I don't make promises lightly, Miss Vaughn." That night, after securing the cabin and posting watches, Mason spread a map across the table. "There's a friend of mine, lives about 3 days' ride north. Patrick McAllister. He and I served together in the war, has a trading post near the Montana Territory line. If we can reach him, he might help us figure out a more permanent solution." Penelope traced the route with her finger. "Through the mountains, that's challenging terrain." "Which makes it harder to follow us," Mason pointed out. "We leave at first light, taking only what we can carry." "I've got a second horse you can ride fresher than your mare. We'll need the speed." "You'd leave your home, your cattle, for a stranger." Disbelief colored her words. Mason's expression softened slightly. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Miss Vaughn, and homes can be rebuilt. Lives can't be replaced." The intimacy of his words hung between them, charging the air with something neither was ready to acknowledge. Penelope looked away first, focusing on practical matters. "How soon can we be ready?" "I've been packing supplies since those men left," Mason admitted. "Some food, ammunition, basic necessities. The rest we'll have to find or do without." They worked through the night, preparing for a journey with no guaranteed outcome. As dawn approached, Penelope paused in her tasks, watching Mason check the horse's shoes with methodical care. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked suddenly. "The truth, please," Mason straightened, considering her question. "Because I know what it's like to feel hunted. After the war, there were men who thought I'd betrayed my unit. It wasn't true, but truth rarely matters when vengeance is the goal." "What happened?" "A good man risked everything to hide me until the real culprit was found. I swore if I ever had the chance to repay that debt to someone else in need, I wouldn't hesitate." He secured the cinch on his saddle. "Besides, I've grown accustomed to your company. Would be a shame to lose my best ranch hand so soon." The attempt at humor broke the tension, drawing a reluctant smile from Penelope. "I'm your only ranch hand, Mr. Thornton." "Mason," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be fugitives together, we might as well use our given names." "Mason," she repeated, testing the familiarity on her tongue. "Then you must call me Penelope." They departed as the first golden rays of sunlight crested the eastern ridge, leaving behind the small cabin that had briefly been Penelope's sanctuary. She felt Mason's eyes on her as they rode, reading the regret in her posture. "We'll come back," he promised. "When it's safe." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Strange how a place she'd known for only days could feel more like home than anywhere she'd been since her parents' deaths. The mountain trails were as challenging as Mason had warned, narrow paths winding through dense forests and along steep ridgelines. They rode hard during daylight hours, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. At night, they made cold camps away from the trail, sharing dried meat and hard biscuits while keeping watch in shifts. On the second night, huddled beneath a lean-to of pine branches as rain pattered gently around them, Penelope found herself studying Mason's profile in the dim light of their carefully shielded fire. The flames cast shadows across the planes of his face, highlighting the strength in his jaw and the kindness that lingered around his eyes despite all he'd seen. "Tell me about the war," she ventured, drawing her knees up to her chest for warmth. "If you don't mind speaking of it." Mason poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "Not much to tell that isn't already known. Served with the Union Army, saw things no man should see, came home different than I left. My father wanted to enlist, but his leg was damaged in a childhood accident. He supported the cause by sending supplies instead." She smiled at the memory. "Mother said he apologized to every soldier who passed through our town, as if his injury were somehow his fault." "Sounds like a good man." "The best," Penelope agreed softly. "He taught me to read using Shakespeare's sonnets and Hugo's novels. Said a mind filled with beautiful words couldn't harbor ugly thoughts." "Yet here you are, on the run for killing a man," Mason observed without judgment. "Here I am," she echoed. "I wonder what he would think of me now." Mason set aside the stick and turned to face her fully. "I think he'd be proud that his daughter had the courage to defend herself when no one else would. You can't know that." "I know what I would want for my own daughter if I had one," he replied simply. "To value her life enough to fight for it, no matter the cost." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Penelope, a place she'd thought permanently closed after witnessing her parents' bodies. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes and she turned away, embarrassed by the display of emotion. Mason pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of private grief. Instead, he changed the subject, pointing to the stars visible through gaps in the clouds. "My father taught me to navigate by those stars, said as long as I could see the North Star I'd never truly be lost." Penelope wiped her eyes discreetly. "Do you believe that we can find our way if we just have one fixed point to guide us?" "I'd like to," he admitted. "Though some days it's harder to see through the clouds than others." They fell silent, each lost in private thoughts as the rain intensified, drumming against their makeshift shelter. Eventually, Penelope felt her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of their journey catching up to her. "Sleep," Mason encouraged. "I'll take first watch. Wake me when it's my turn," she insisted, already drifting toward unconsciousness. "Promise?" "I promise," he agreed, though they both knew he would likely let her sleep through the night. Penelope's last thought, before sleep claimed her, was how strange it felt to trust someone so completely after such a short acquaintance. Perhaps desperation made unlikely allies, or perhaps something deeper was growing between them, something neither had anticipated when she rode into his life a week earlier. Dawn of the third day brought clearing skies and renewed determination. They made good time along the mountain trails, Mason's knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated shortcuts and avoided areas where they might be easily spotted. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley where a collection of buildings clustered near a fast-flowing river. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and horses were corralled near what appeared to be a trading post. "McAllister's place," Mason confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "We made it." As they approached the settlement, Penelope felt hope mingling with apprehension. Would Mason's friend be willing to help them? And even if he was, how long could they hide from men determined to find her? The trading post was a substantial log structure with a wide porch and large windows displaying goods for sale. Several men lounged outside, eyeing the newcomers with the cautious interest of frontier dwellers who survived by sizing up strangers quickly. Mason dismounted first, helping Penelope down with a gentle hand at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her despite their exhaustion and the gravity of their situation. "Wait here," he murmured. "Let me find Patrick." Before he could move toward the building, the door swung open, and a barrel-chested man with a graying beard and an eye patch stepped onto the porch. He squinted at the visitors, then broke into a wide grin. "Mason Thornton, as I live and breathe," he boomed, striding forward with arms outstretched. "Been, 2 years since you graced my humble establishment." The men embraced with the ease of old friends before Patrick stepped back to appraise Penelope with undisguised curiosity. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Penelope Vaughn," Mason replied, his tone conveying more than the simple introduction. "We've ridden hard for 3 days to reach you, Patrick. Need to talk somewhere private." Understanding dawned in Patrick's good eye. He nodded, suddenly serious. "Of course. Come inside, both of you. Mary will see to your horses." He gestured to a young woman who had emerged from a nearby stable. She hurried forward to take the reins, offering Penelope a shy smile as she led the tired animals away. The interior of the trading post was warm and surprisingly well stocked with goods ranging from practical necessities to modest luxuries. Patrick led them through to a back room that served as living quarters, motioning for them to sit at a sturdy wooden table while he poured 3 glasses of whiskey. "Now then," he said, settling across from them. "What kind of trouble are you in that brings you all this way without warning?" Mason glanced at Penelope, silently asking permission to share her story. She nodded, too weary to recount the tale herself. As Mason explained the situation, Blackstone's murder of her parents, his threats, her justified self-defense, and the pursuit by men using the law as cover for personal vengeance, Patrick listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grim. "Blackstone," he muttered when Mason finished. "That name's familiar. Part of the Western Mining Consortium, wasn't he? Nasty outfit. They've been buying up land all through Colorado and Wyoming, not always by honest means." "Then you believe us?" Penelope asked, hope flaring in her chest. Patrick drained his whiskey. "Girl, I've seen enough of this world to know that law and justice aren't always the same thing. If Mason vouches for you, that's good enough for me." Relief washed over her, loosening the knot of tension that had resided in her chest since fleeing Silverdale. "Question is," Patrick continued, "what's your plan now? Can't stay here indefinitely. My place is too well known and traders pass through regularly with news and gossip." Mason leaned forward. "We need somewhere safe while we figure out a more permanent solution." "Somewhere those men won't think to look." Patrick stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I might have just the place. Got a line cabin about a day's ride north of here, up in the high country. Use it mainly for hunting trips. It's basic but solid. Food, stocks, ammunition, enough supplies to last through summer if you're careful." "Sounds perfect," Mason agreed. "We'd be in your debt." "Nonsense. Still owe you for Chattanooga." Patrick waved away the gratitude. "Rest here tonight, get a proper meal, and sleep in real beds. You can head out at first light tomorrow. I'll draw you a map." Later, after bathing in real hot water for the first time in days and changing into clean clothes borrowed from Patrick's wife, Penelope felt almost human again. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the small room they'd given her, brushing out her damp hair and reflecting on the strange turns her life had taken. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She rose to answer it, finding Mason standing in the hallway, similarly refreshed and wearing clean clothes that must have belonged to Patrick. "Just wanted to check that you had everything you need," he explained, his eyes carefully avoiding the sight of her loose hair cascading over her shoulders. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Better than fine, actually. It feels miraculous to be clean again." A smile tugged at his lips. "Agreed, though I suspect we'll be back to roughing it soon enough. Do you think this cabin will be safe?" She asked, vulnerability creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "Patrick wouldn't suggest it if it wasn't," Mason replied confidently. "And it buys us time to consider our next move." Penelope hesitated, then gave voice to the question that had been plaguing her. "What is our next move, Mason? I can't keep running forever, and I can't ask you to abandon your life indefinitely for my sake." His expression softened. "Let's worry about that after we reach the cabin, one step at a time." She nodded, though the uncertainty of their future weighed heavily on her heart. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." "You would have survived," he interrupted gently. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Penelope." The way he said her name, with such quiet conviction, stirred something within her that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Good night, Mason." "Good night," he replied, lingering a moment longer than necessary before turning away. Penelope closed the door and leaned against it, pressing a hand to her racing heart. This was madness. She was a fugitive with no home, no future, and no right to feel anything beyond gratitude toward the man who had risked everything to help her. Yet here she was, cheeks flushed and pulse quickened by nothing more than the way he spoke her name. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the realization that their respite was temporary. After a hearty breakfast and tearful thanks to Patrick and his wife, Penelope and Mason set out on fresh horses, their saddlebags laden with supplies for the journey ahead. The trail to the Line cabin wound higher into the mountains, through dense forests of pine and aspen that would soon burst into spring green. Wildlife-abounded deer startled at their approach, and once they spotted a black bear ambling across a distant meadow. "It's beautiful up here," Penelope observed as they paused to rest the horses beside a tumbling stream. "So peaceful. Hard to believe there are men hunting us just a few days' ride away." "That's the mountains for you," Mason replied, filling their canteens with the crystal-clear water. "They have a way of making human concerns seem small by comparison." "Is that why you chose to live in such an isolated place? To gain perspective?" Mason considered her question as he secured the canteens to his saddle. "Partly. After the war, I couldn't stomach crowds or noise. Too many memories. Too many ghosts following me. The quiet helped. And Rebecca, did she share your need for solitude?" A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his late wife. Rebecca was a city girl born and raised in Philadelphia. She found the isolation difficult at first. "But she adapted because she loved me." His voice softened with remembrance. "She was planting a garden when the fever took her, said she needed flowers to brighten the wilderness." Penelope felt a pang of sorrow for this woman she'd never met. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mason, truly." "It was a long time ago," he said, though his eyes suggested the wound remained fresh. "We should keep moving, still have a few hours' ride ahead of us." They continued their journey in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts as the trail climbed steadily higher. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, partially concealed by the surrounding forest. "This must be it," Mason said, dismounting and approaching cautiously, rifle at the ready. "Stay with the horses until I make sure it's secure." Penelope waited anxiously as he circled the structure, checking windows and the perimeter before disappearing inside. A few minutes later he emerged, waving her forward. "All clear," he called, "and better stocked than I expected." Patrick's been a generous host. The cabin was indeed well appointed for a hunting lodge. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area nearby. A table and chairs occupied the center of the single room, while a bed built into a corner alcove provided sleeping quarters. Shelves held preserved foods, cooking utensils, and other necessities, while hooks near the door supported various tools and weapons. "One bed," Penelope observed, unable to keep a hint of awkwardness from her voice. "I'll sleep by the fire," Mason said immediately. "There are plenty of blankets." They settled into a routine over the next few days, establishing watches and exploring the immediate vicinity to familiarize themselves with escape routes if needed. During daylight hours, they remained close to the cabin, taking turns at necessary tasks gathering firewood, checking traps Patrick had set for small game, and replenishing their water supply from a nearby spring. Evenings brought them together by the fire, sharing meals and conversation that gradually revealed more of their histories and hopes. Penelope learned that Mason had been a schoolteacher before the war, with dreams of opening his own academy someday. He discovered her passion for literature and her secret ambition to write stories of her own. "What kind of stories?" he asked one night as they sat before the hearth, the remains of their rabbit stew forgotten as conversation flowed easily between them. Penelope hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing important, just tales I imagine sometimes, about people finding their way in difficult circumstances." "Like you're doing now," Mason observed, "I suppose." She stared into the flames. "Though I'm not sure I'm finding my way so much as running blindly and hoping for the best." "You're alive," he pointed out. "That counts for something?" "Alive but not living," she countered. "Not really. What kind of life is this, Mason? Hiding in the wilderness, jumping at shadows, dependent on the charity of strangers." "A temporary one," he assured her. "We just need to determine our next step." Penelope turned to face him directly. "And what might that be? I can't return to Silverdale. I have no family elsewhere to shelter me. The law believes I'm a murderer, and Blackstone's associates want revenge. What possible solution exists that doesn't involve running forever or ending with a noose around my neck?" Mason was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered her words. Finally, he spoke. "We could prove Blackstone's crimes. Find evidence of what he did to your parents, expose the mining company's illegal activities." "With what resources? What authority?" Penelope shook her head. "We're two people alone against a powerful organization with money and influence." "Not entirely alone," Mason corrected. "Patrick has connections, and I know a newspaper editor in Denver who's been looking to make a name for himself with exactly this kind of story." Hope flickered within Penelope, quickly tempered by caution. "Even if we could gather evidence, I'd still be wanted for Blackstone's murder." "Self-defense isn't murder," Mason insisted. "With the right lawyer, the right judge, the right miracle," she interrupted bitterly. "Be realistic, Mason. Women like me don't get fair trials when powerful men's interests are involved." He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers with gentle pressure. "Then we'll find another way, but I won't accept that your only options are running or dying." The warmth of his touch and the determination in his voice stirred that dangerous something within her again, not just gratitude now, but a deeper feeling she dared not name. Penelope withdrew her hand, suddenly needing distance. "It's late," she murmured, rising from her chair. "And it's your turn to rest while I take watch." Mason let her retreat, though his eyes followed her with an expression that suggested their conversation was far from finished. Days stretched into a week as they maintained their vigilant existence at the cabin. Penelope began to wonder if perhaps they had truly escaped pursuit, if the men hunting her had given up the chase or followed false leads in other directions. The tentative peace allowed her to relax slightly, to appreciate the beauty of their mountain sanctuary and the unexpected companionship she'd found with Mason. They were checking fishing lines at a small lake half a mile from the cabin when Mason suddenly tensed, raising a hand to signal silence. Penelope froze, straining to hear what had alarmed him. The distant but unmistakable sound of horses approaching from the south reached her ears. "Back to the cabin," Mason whispered urgently. "Now." They moved swiftly through the forest, taking care to leave minimal tracks as they retreated toward their temporary home. Once inside, Mason quickly gathered essential supplies while Penelope saddled the horses, which they kept in a small lean-to behind the structure. "How many?" she asked as they worked, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. "At least 3, maybe 4, Mason replied grimly. "Could be hunters or trappers, but we can't take that chance. How did they find us?" Despair threatened to overwhelm her. "We were so careful." "Questions for later," he said, checking his rifle and pistol. Right now, we need to move. They led the horses deeper into the forest before mounting, following a game trail that wound north into even more rugged terrain. Mason set a punishing pace, pushing the animals as fast as the difficult trail would allow. Penelope's mind raced with possibilities had someone at the trading post betrayed them. Had they been followed from the beginning? Was there nowhere truly safe? After an hour of hard riding, Mason finally slowed, listening intently for sounds of pursuit. The forest remained quiet except for natural sounds: birds, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional crack of a branch as some animal moved through the underbrush. "I think we've lost them for now," he said cautiously. "But we need to keep moving. There's an old trapper's hut about 10 miles north that Patrick mentioned. We might find shelter there." "And after that?" Penelope asked, the weariness of constant flight evident in her voice. "Another cabin. Another desperate escape in the night. When does it end, Mason?" He had no answer that wouldn't sound like hollow reassurance. Instead, he guided his horse alongside hers and reached across to squeeze her hand briefly. "One problem at a time. First, we reach the trapper's hut. Then we reassess." The trapper's hut proved to be little more than a crude shelter: 4 walls and a roof with a dirt floor and a small stone fire pit in the center. It offered minimal protection from the elements and none from determined pursuers, but at least it concealed them from immediate view. As night fell, they huddled inside without risking a fire, sharing dried meat and hardtack from their supplies. The temperature dropped sharply with darkness, and Penelope shivered despite her wool coat and the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Here," Mason offered his own blanket. "Take this too. Then you'll freeze," she protested. "I've endured worse." When she continued to refuse, he sighed and moved closer. "We could share body heat. It's the most practical solution." The suggestion, logical though it was, sent a flush of warmth through Penelope that had nothing to do with temperature. Yet practical necessity overcame propriety, and she nodded her agreement. They arranged themselves awkwardly at first, sitting side by side with blankets draped around both their shoulders. But as the night deepened and the cold intensified, they gradually shifted until Penelope found herself nestled against Mason's chest, his arms encircling her protectively as they shared their combined warmth. "This reminds me of Valley Forge," Mason murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Winter of '64, we huddled together like this just to survive the night. Did it work?" she asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, too intimate, too soft. "I'm here, aren't I?" There was a smile in his voice, though she couldn't see his face in the darkness. Silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable quiet filled with the synchronization of their breathing and the steady beat of Mason's heart against her back. Penelope found herself relaxing into his embrace, the terror of their flight temporarily forgotten in the simple human comfort of not being alone. "Mason," she whispered after a long while, unsure if he was still awake, "do you ever wish you'd never offered me shelter that first day? That you'd sent me on my way and avoided all this danger?" His arms tightened fractionally around her. "Not for a single moment." The simple honesty in his voice undid something within her, some final resistance against the feelings that had been growing steadily since they'd met. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. "I don't deserve your loyalty," she whispered brokenly. "I've brought nothing but trouble into your life, Penelope." Her name on his lips was gentle yet commanding, compelling her to listen. "Look at me." She turned within the circle of his arms, barely able to make out his features in the darkness. His hand found her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear with infinite tenderness. "I don't deserve love," she whispered, the admission torn from some wounded place deep within her soul. Mason's voice was low and fierce with conviction. "You deserve the whole world." The words hung between them, charged with meaning beyond their simple syllables. Penelope's breath caught as Mason's face lowered toward hers, his intention clear even in the darkness. She had a heartbeat to decide to turn away or to accept what he offered. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively. a question rather than a demand. Penelope answered by leaning into his touch, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as the kiss deepened into something neither had anticipated when their journey began. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling with more than cold, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan this," he murmured, "didn't expect to feel this way." "Nor did I," she admitted. "It seems improbable, perhaps even foolish given our circumstances. Or perhaps it's the only thing that makes sense in a world that often doesn't," he countered, his fingers threading through her hair with reverent care. They held each other through the night, trading soft kisses and whispered confidences as the hours passed. By dawn, something fundamental had shifted between them, a commitment made without formal words, a promise to face whatever came next together rather than merely as reluctant companions in misfortune. Morning brought both clarity and complication. They needed a plan beyond simply running, yet their options remained severely limited. As they prepared to continue their journey, Mason broached an idea that had formed during the night. "What if we crossed into Canada?" he suggested, studying the distant northern peaks. British territory. Beyond the reach of Colorado law, Penelope considered this as she secured her saddlebags. "Is it possible? The border must be watched." "Not all of it," Mason replied. "There are places where a person could cross with minimal risk, especially this time of year before the mountain passes are fully clear of snow." "You'd leave everything behind, your land, your cattle, your home." She searched his face, needing to be certain. "For me." "For us," he corrected gently. "Land can be bought elsewhere. A home is wherever we decide to make it." He took her hands in his. "I've lost one chance at happiness, Penelope. I won't squander another by clinging to things that can be replaced when what matters most might be lost." Her heart swelled with emotions too complex to name gratitude, yes, but also a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. "Then we go north." The decision made, they set out with renewed purpose, following game trails that gradually led them higher into the mountains. Mason's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as they navigated the challenging landscape, avoiding the few settlements and trading posts that might harbor those who would recognize them. Their journey was not without hardship. Spring storms brought drenching rain and occasionally hail or snow at higher elevations. Game was scarce in some areas, forcing them to ration their dwindling supplies. And always, the fear of pursuit lingered like a shadow at their heels, prompting them to maintain vigilant watches even when exhaustion demanded rest. 2 weeks into their northward trek, they encountered an unexpected ally in the form of an elderly Blackfoot man named Two Eagles, who found them struggling to cross a rain-swollen river. Rather than reporting their presence to authorities, he guided them to his small camp and offered shelter for the night. "You run from something," he observed as they sat beside his fire, sharing a meal of venison stew. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Mason admitted, seeing no point in denying the obvious, "men who would harm us unjustly." Two Eagles nodded sagely. "My people know about such men. They come with papers that mean nothing, words that promise everything, and hearts that value only what can be taken." Penelope exchanged a glance with Mason, surprised by the old man's perceptiveness. "We seek safe passage north," she ventured. "To Canada." "Many trails," Two Eagles replied cryptically, "some better than others." He studied them with dark eyes that missed nothing. "You travel as husband and wife." The question caught them off guard. They had not discussed such formalities, though their hearts had clearly aligned. Mason recovered first. "Not yet by law, but in intention." The simple declaration sent warmth flooding through Penelope's chest. Two Eagles nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then tomorrow, I show you the best path. One my family has used for generations when borders drawn by white men threatened our freedom." True to his word, the following day Two Eagles led them to a hidden trail that wound through a narrow pass between towering peaks. "Follow this," he instructed. 3 days' journey if weather holds. Then you find yourself in new land where different laws rule." They thanked him with genuine gratitude and gifts from their limited supplies: a good knife, ammunition for his ancient rifle, and a silver brooch that had belonged to Penelope's mother, one of the few keepsakes she'd grabbed when fleeing Silverdale. "May the Creator guide your steps," 2 eagles said in parting, "and may you find peace in your new beginning." The mountain pass proved as challenging as they had feared: narrow ledges where a single misstep could mean disaster, snowfields that had to be carefully traversed, and the constant threat of rockslides from the unstable terrain above. Yet they pressed forward, driven by the promise of safety that lay beyond. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, just as 2 eagles had predicted, they crested a final ridge and gazed down upon a valley unlike any they had yet seen. Vast forests of pines stretched toward the horizon, interspersed with meadows where wildflowers painted the landscape in vibrant colors. A river wound like a silver ribbon through the valley floor, catching the sunlight in flashes of brilliance. "Canada," Mason breathed, a smile spreading across his face. "British Columbia, we made it, Penelope." She slipped her hand into his, tears of relief and exhaustion blurring her vision. A new beginning. They made camp that night on Canadian soil, allowing themselves the luxury of a proper fire for the first time in days. As flames danced before them, casting golden light across their weary faces, Mason reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the firelight. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, holding up a simple gold band. "I've carried it since Rebecca died, thinking I might someday have a daughter to pass it to." Penelope's breath caught as understanding dawned. Mason took her hand, his expression solemn yet filled with unmistakable joy. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined finding love again," he said softly. "Circumstances forced us together, but choice keeps us that way. I can't offer you wealth or position or even certainty about what tomorrow brings, but I can promise you this: my heart, my loyalty, and every day I have left on this earth devoted to your happiness." Tears spilled freely down Penelope's cheeks now. "I have nothing to offer in return," she whispered. "No dowry, no family connections, not even a good name untarnished by accusations." "You offer everything that matters," Mason countered, squeezing her hand gently. "Courage, compassion, resilience, and a love I never expected to find again. Will you marry me, Penelope Vaughn? Will you build a new life with me here in this strange land where our pasts can't follow?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her heart too full for eloquence. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, slightly too large, but a perfect symbol of promises exchanged under the vast Canadian sky. Their kiss sealed the commitment, passionate yet tender with the knowledge that this was merely the beginning of a journey they would share for all their remaining days. The settlement of New Hope lived up to its name for the newly arrived Americans who introduced themselves as Mason and Penelope Thornton. The small community on the shores of a pristine lake welcomed skilled newcomers, asking few questions about their past as long as they contributed to the collective welfare. Mason's experience with cattle proved valuable to local ranchers, while Penelope's education and literate hand soon earned her a position teaching the settlement's children. They purchased a modest plot of land on the outskirts of town, building a cabin that, while simple, held the warmth and promise that comes from a home created with love. Their wedding took place 6 weeks after their arrival, a community celebration that welcomed them fully into the fabric of New Hope. Standing before the traveling preacher who visited the settlement monthly, they exchanged vows that acknowledged both the unconventional nature of their union and the depth of feeling that had grown between them against all odds. "You saved me," Penelope whispered to Mason as they danced under lantern light at their wedding celebration. "Not just from those who hunted me, but from believing I didn't deserve happiness." "We saved each other," he corrected gently, his arms secure around her waist. And will continue doing so every day, I suspect. That's what love means. As months passed, they gradually relaxed their vigilance, though Mason maintained connections with Patrick McAllister through occasional correspondence carried by trustworthy traders. Through these letters, they learned that interest in Penelope's case had indeed waned as more pressing matters occupied the attention of both law enforcement and Blackstone's associates. More significantly, Patrick reported rumors that the Western Mining Consortium had fallen under federal investigation for fraudulent practices and intimidation of landowners, precisely the crimes Blackstone had committed against Penelope's family. Though justice came too late for her parents, there was some comfort in knowing that other families might be spared similar tragedies. Their first child, a daughter they named Rebecca Ann, arrived the following spring, bringing with her the kind of joy neither had dared hope for during their desperate flight across the mountains. Mason wept unashamedly when he first held her, this tiny testament to the future they had risked everything to claim. "She has your eyes," he told Penelope, marveling at the infant's delicate features, "and hopefully your spirit." "Let's hope she has your calm judgment," Penelope countered with a tired smile. "One impulsive fugitive in the family is quite enough." As Rebecca grew, joined 2 years later by a son they called Michael Patrick, Penelope found inspiration for the stories she had always dreamed of writing. In the quiet evenings after the children were asleep, she filled journal after journal with tales of courage, redemption, and love found in unlikely circumstances, thinly veiled accounts of their own journey that she hoped might someday inspire others facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Mason encouraged her creative pursuits, often listening as she read her latest pages aloud, offering suggestions and praise in equal measure. Their partnership extended beyond the practical aspects of frontier life to encompass the nurturing of each other's dreams and aspirations. 5 years after their arrival in New Hope, a letter arrived from Patrick that changed everything once again. The Western Mining Consortium had been dismantled following extensive federal investigations. More importantly, new evidence had emerged regarding Jedediah Blackstone's criminal activities, including sworn testimony from former associates implicating him in multiple murders, including those of Penelope's parents. The governor of Colorado has issued a posthumous pardon for Penelope Vaughn, Patrick wrote. Her actions have been officially recognized as self-defense against a known criminal. She is free to return to American soil without fear of prosecution. The news brought a flood of conflicting emotions: vindication, grief for what might have been, relief that the shadow of the past had finally lifted. Penelope and Mason discussed the implications long into the night, weighing the possibility of returning to the land they had fled against the life they had built in their adopted homeland. "We could reclaim your parents' property," Mason suggested, "or visit my old cabin. See what remains of our former lives." Penelope gazed around their home at the children's toys scattered across the floor, the handmade curtains fluttering in the evening breeze, the bookshelves Mason had crafted to hold her growing collection of journals. "This is our life now," she said softly. "Perhaps someday we'll visit, show the children where we came from, but this is home." Mason's smile held understanding and agreement. "Home," he echoed, drawing her into his embrace. "The one place I never truly found until I found you." Years passed, weaving the story of the Thornton family into the fabric of New Hope's history. Rebecca grew into a young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's steady resolve, while Michael developed a talent for working with horses that made him sought after throughout the region. 2 more children joined their family: Elizabeth in 1882 and James in 1885, completing the circle of love that had begun in such unlikely circumstances. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Penelope with a leather-bound volume her collected stories, privately printed by a publisher in Vancouver who had recognized their literary merit. "Stories of Hope," the cover proclaimed, with P.V. Thornton listed as the author. "Your voice deserves to be heard," Mason told her as she traced the embossed lettering with trembling fingers. "Your courage deserves to be remembered." That evening, as they sat on the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope rested her head against Mason's shoulder, overcome with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I still sometimes wonder how we survived it all," she murmured. "How two people with such broken pasts found their way to this kind of happiness." Mason's arm tightened around her shoulders, his voice soft with the wisdom of their shared years. "Perhaps because we recognized in each other what we couldn't see in ourselves, that regardless of our pasts, we deserved a future filled with love." Penelope smiled, remembering the desperate young woman who had once believed herself unworthy of such gifts. "I don't deserve love," she had whispered in that darkest hour. "You deserve the whole world," he had answered. And somehow, against all odds, they had found it together, not the whole world perhaps, but their own perfect corner of it, built with courage, sustained by love, and proof that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings.